Handel lived an incredibly long life for someone who lived when he lived. So he was able to compose over a long period of time, 1685, 1759. People just didn't live that long. I mean, what was Mozart when he died? 30, 33?
30, yeah.
Really?
Very
Wow,
young.
that young.
Beethoven was early 50s, late 40s, even though he looks much older in every depiction.
Every bust you see, he looks like he's old,
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Hymnpartial, the podcast where we talk all things church music. I'm Monet Funke.
And I'm Cara Devereaux, and today we're kicking off a short series on Handel's Messiah with special guests DJ Bulls and Dr. Aaron Rice. We're looking at the man behind this epic piece. We'll be discussing how Handel was instrumental in forming the music of an era, and we will be analysing why his music has stood the test of time.
But today, the 28th of March, is the very last day you can enter our fun Easter giveaway. Head over to our Instagram at Hymnpartial to enter for a chance to win Man of Sorrows, King of Glory, What the Humiliation and Exaltation of Jesus Mean for Us by John T. Rhodes. That giveaway is happening exclusively on Instagram and, like we said, ends today, midnight GMT. Also, before we dive in this week's bonus clip, we ask our guests if Messiah should really be sung at Christmas or not, but only newsletter subscribers get to see that content first. If you are listening and haven't signed up, go to hymnpartial.com and do so today.
We were very excited to have DJ Bulls back on, and we're excited that Dr. Aaron Rice is also joining us. Their enthusiasm is infectious. Yes. We were already looking forward to this series, but their kind of like excitement and enthusiasm about the whole thing has just made it so much more fun, and we can't wait to share with you all the great stuff that we've been learning.
Yeah, we have this song slated to talk about on the lead up for Easter for months and months and months. And we were really fortunate to have DJ and Aaron volunteer their time to school us, basically, to experts really on this song. And what I will say that's different about this episode is that it really is more academic, and I don't mean that in a boring way, like, oh, here we go. I mean, like, they're really schooling us on the history of, in this episode, Handel himself, and just kind of the context in which he grew up in. And I just find it so fascinating. And
Yeah, there's a lot that I learned as well. I was actually surprised because there were things that they mentioned, like musical terms, and I was like, oh, no, wait, I do remember that. But yeah, there was just so much interesting things. And Handel himself, what a guy. Yeah. But yeah, rather than talk about it, we'll let you listen. So without further ado, here's the episode. DJ Bulls is a familiar face. He has joined us on the podcast before when we spoke about Trinitarian hymns. He is a hymn expert and doctoral student. He has served for almost 20 years in the Churches of Christ and now serves as the Worship and Communications Minister for the Glenwood Church in Tyler, Texas. We also have Dr. Aaron Rice joining us. Dr. Rice serves as tenured Associate Professor of Music, Director of Choral Activities, and Coordinator of Music and Worship Leadership Studies at Shorter University. He received his Doctor of Musical Arts in Church Music and Choral Conducting at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary and is a member of the American Choral Directors Association. DJ and Aaron, welcome to the show.
Hey, y'all.
I love the nice Southern greeting that you guys are giving us. It shows how far apart we are in the world. Us being way over here in Scotland. And
we have accents?
The hey
Slightly.
Y'all gives it away just a bit, the hey y'all. So yes, as we were saying before we started recording, we're really excited to talk about Handel and his Messiah. But we thought this episode we'd kind of maybe focus on the man behind the piece. So we just wanted to ask you guys, can you tell us, before we get into Handel, can you tell us a little bit about your background with music and how you came to know and love this piece?
Sure. So I really did not have a lot of music education growing up. Honestly, in elementary school, we had about 6 different music directors through my entire 5 years in school. So it was a dramatic change whenever I got to middle school and was invested in with my band director and choral director. And I really was exposed to a lot of things, and I got passionate about music. And then I went through a phase of contemporary Christian music, long hair, guitar, holes in my jeans, mother of pearl buttons. Whoa. It was something. And I had a conversion experience and started wearing bow ties at that point whenever we got to college. But whenever I became an undergraduate student, I was exposed to so many things. Major choral works with orchestra, lots of Renaissance motets and that sort of thing, and was really just blown away with the wide expanse of music for voices. And my freshman year, I got to sing Handel's Messiah, and it was just one of those things that was like, man, I've heard a few of these things on commercials or whatever it would be, but it was just blown away with it. And then fast forward through my master's studies when we were working on lots of choral orchestral repertoire, and then to doctoral studies whenever I started at Southwestern, where DJ and I were in school together. We sang Messiah every school year at least 3 times. We would sing it with the Fort Worth Symphony in the hall. We would sing it a couple of times on campus with a variety of orchestral members, whether they be from the symphony or pickup musicians. And so that means I sang it 9 times in 3 years. Wow. And it was one of those things that just got in your blood, and one of those things that you really came to love and find new things about every year. And then fast forward to now, I just conducted it for the first time with my choral ensembles this past December. And so it's one of those things that kind of came full circle for me, and has been a very pivotal piece in my development as a choral musician and as a believer.
So if not all 9 of those performances at Southwestern, for at least 6 of them, Aaron and I sat next to each other. Right. So we had our own play-by-play of all of those performances. And it's so true. It is a journey from being on the choir side, singing the piece, to being on the podium side, conducting the piece. My first exposure was probably as an 8th grade choir singer, being called up to sing with the high school choir because they didn't have enough tenors. And my voice probably hadn't changed fully. So I could sing those high notes, perhaps. But in high school, we sang, we would sing, "And the glory of the Lord, glory to God, for unto us a child is born," and the Hallelujah chorus at Christmas. Our schools in the hometown where I grew up in Paris, Texas, would come together and do this big Christmas concert together. And as a matter of fact, the very first time I did Messiah, we did it with a man named Charles Nelson. Charles Nelson is a legendary choral figure in North America. He was the brother of Byron Nelson, who was a legendary golfer. But he was a bass baritone professional singer and conductor who sang with Robert Shaw and sang with all these big names, Messiah and other works. But to be thrown into it as a high school student and to study it as an undergraduate choral music major, and then to study it at the master's level, and then to sing it and study it all at Southwestern together. And then I conducted it my first time with my choir in 2017, Christmas 2017. And to be very honest, the piece had lost a little bit of its luster. Having sung it all of those times, I think the beauty of it had sort of gotten lost in repetition of singing it, umpteen bajillion times. But the first time you pick up that baton to give the downbeat on the overture on the podium, it was a new work. It was a fresh. all over again. And I'm really grateful for that, because it is a piece that shapes the way we think as choral conductors and as church musicians and as Christian musicians and as Christians. It shapes all of those things.
Yeah.
It's a substantive and important piece of music in my life.
Wow,
It's
that's
really-
awesome.
Sorry.
I was just gonna say, I spent nearly 8 years in various choirs through high school and university, and I never sang it once. So that's kind of, I feel like I've missed out on something. I feel like I've missed out on something foundational in terms of being in a choir. But we did see it live in 2019. Cara, correct me here. Scottish Royal Orchestra.
Royal Scottish National Orchestra.
Yes, there we go. And that was fantastic. Really, really special. It was it was 2020. It was the first week. I think they do it like right after January 1st every year.
They performed the whole thing?
I think so.
All 3 hours?
No, it must be condensed. It was actually, now I don't remember. It might have been 3 hours. There was like an intermission, and I feel like but it didn't feel like 3 hours if it was.
Well, that's what's most important.
Yeah. I was like, oh man, this is going to end. It might have been a condensed one. I'll put a pin in that one. I'll come back to you. I'll ask my husband.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, if I'd been able to play music like that when I was in orchestra, I wouldn't have hated orchestra. It's also really encouraging that you guys didn't really have that much musical background, like especially you, Aaron, when you were younger, that you came into music later, because like we look at you and we're like, oh my goodness, you're a doctor of music, but you don't have to be a prodigy from age 4 to love music. No. So in some ways, Handel might be a household name, but I'm going to admit I don't know a ton about him. So could you maybe tell us a little bit about his musical background and about just his life in general?
Sure. So Handel was born really close to Leipzig. So we think about Leipzig being Bach country. Handel was actually born just north of Leipzig and grew up there. Had a father who his mother was his father's second wife. And so he was much younger than many of his siblings. And his father, if you think about folks that who, they may be a tag along sibling, they get a lot different life than say their older siblings. And so Handel was in kind of that boat and was able to sit under some trees that he did not plant in many ways. And so he was able to not only gain education in music through his brother and some other folks in his life, but he also was able to get some significant training because his father was high up in the regional government and in the court there. And so he was expected to study law, just like a lot of affluent folks during that time. If you're going to work, you're going to study the law, and you were going to read there. And so what ended up happening is he had several folks in his corner that said, no, Dad, you need to let this guy study music. And so he did. And he continued to grow as a musician. And by the time he was a teenager, he was serving as a church musician and a Calvinist parish there. And so got some experience doing that. He was studying music theory, composition, violin, keyboard, all the essentials. And then after he was about 17 or so, he moved up north and actually began working for one of the only state operas in the Austria-German area. And he worked there and grew there and began to build a network. And so he developed lots of connections and grew as a composer. So whenever he got there, he was composing primarily for keyboard and for strings. And then as he was working for the opera and playing for them, he was like, oh my gosh, this is great music. And he really began to be a writer of vocal line, and thinking about how does the voice work and how can we write for that. And then the hotbed for music, particularly for opera, we've been saying he's been influenced by opera, was Italy at that point. And so around the turn of the century, he moves to Italy, experiences a lot, both in the area of opera and oratorio and sacred music, and is just in a frenzy of growth and development and connection and this sort of thing. And so he grows and begins to write just feverishly, as everybody who is in their really exponential stage of development, he's going through one of those. And he begins to write particularly in opera and sacred music, and then comes back, and he's back in the area in Germany, and gets a job working as a court musician. And it's just great. He's finding an opportunity to make money and write and begin to develop some of his skills. And as soon as he gets hired, he says, I need to go to England. And so he goes to London for about a year and a half, and begins to take all the things that he's developed in Italy as far as writing for opera and writing oratorio and beginning to write sacred music. And he goes there and he spends a year and a half and writes while he's there. He stays overstays his welcome basically. And his employer back in Germany is pretty insistent that he get back. Well, push comes to shove, and his employer becomes the King of England.
What?
And crazy, right? He becomes the King of England, comes over, and then Handel basically makes up with him, and they form a strong relationship. And then his writing becomes even more directed towards opera and eventually oratorio, and kind of expands. And so that's where we see him whenever he writes Messiah, sets Messiah in the 1740s, early 1740s. And so we see this development. Later on in his life, he goes blind for about the last 7, 8, 9 years. He's blind, and so he can't see what's going on. And during what we'll talk about later on as this Messiah revival around 1750, he's blind. He's not there. His connection with everything is emotional, and it's oral, but it's not visual any longer.
Wow.
And so we see, as we'll talk about later on again, he has a big revival with his music after he passes, and then the mystique of Messiah comes alive. And so that's kind of how he did a really bird's eye view, a survey of Handel's life.
Wow.
You made an interesting comment, Cara, asking, how much do people know about Handel? Invariably, if you ask the question, how many composers can you name of just Joe average on the street?
Yeah.
You're going to get Beethoven. You're going to get Mozart. You might get Bach. And you might get Handel. Handel would probably be in that second tier of most recognizable names. But what I don't think most people realize is, without a doubt, they have heard Handel's music, whether it's the water music that's been in every commercial and every type of commercial on TV. If they've watched The Wedding of Princess Diana, it's Zadok the priest, the coronation anthems as they're coming down the aisle. I mean, the music of Handel is everywhere, but sometimes, he was born the same year as J.S. Bach, 1685. And so, Handel actually outlives Bach by almost a decade. But, Handel can get lost in the Bachs and the Vivaldis and the Buxtehude and all these other giant names in Baroque sacred music. But in hearing Aaron kind of lay out that 30,000 foot perspective, not thinking too heavily in putting all your eggs in the basket with Johann Sebastian Bach, as Handel grows, as Handel progresses in time, so grows Baroque style.
Correct.
the whole genre of opera explodes.
Wow.
Largely because of Handel's pen, and style moves from this stately, stuffier style of music. The orchestra is small. They're not as likely to be, just Joe player off the street, very, very professional, but the orchestra grows, gets bigger, new instruments, technology develops, the opera orchestra gets bigger, the opera overture as its own item becomes a genre when Mozart comes onto the scene. You can use the chronology of Handel's work as a sort of a gauge to look at the development of music in the Baroque period. And he wrote some sacred things early on. There's a piece that's sort of beginning to come back, at least into favor in scholarly circles and talking about it. The Bacchus Passion. You'll hear people writing about it, or you'll hear the Chandos anthems or a Te Deum. But really, that line of 1741. Things change in the oratorio world
for sure.
And again, Handel is the genesis behind that. He sets the table for Haydn. He sets the table for Mendelssohn, even though the oratorio is sort of supplanted by opera as the years go by. Opera owes a great deal to Handel.
Yeah.
And it's sort of with all of that background landscape that this monumental monolith of a 3-hour sacred work comes onto the scene.
Yeah. Wow, that's really interesting. Obviously, like I said, I think Handel is a household name in some regards, but I didn't know kind of his impact on this entire kind of, not one part, but like that entire period of music. And hearing that is really exciting because of how much we love this piece. I did check. It was the full 3 hours. It was the full 3 hours that we saw at the Royal National Scottish Orchestra. And I would totally be murdered if I didn't say this, but my husband was actually born in the same place as Handel. It's Halle.
Halle, right?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. When people ask him where he's from, he says, I was born in East Germany, in this place called Halle. You probably never heard of it, but it's where Handel was born. Right. So, DJ, you mentioned there are some other religious works that Handel kind of did early on. Would you say that there are any kind of other significant contributions that he made outside of Messiah that are worth noting, or would you say those are it?
Well, the oratorio and opera, yes, his instrumental music was important. Yes, it made him money. Yes, it kept him composing between the times he was writing opera and an oratorio. But I don't think it's a far cry to say that his most significant contributions were the two O's, opera and oratorio. Now in the choral world, and Aaron can tell you this because we both talked about it, how much we like the coronation anthems and other pieces that he wrote, but they're simply not as popular. And I mean, you go to YouTube and type in HAN and see if Handel's Messiah isn't one of the first three things that comes up. And that tells you the immense global popularity of that piece. Now, it didn't start that way. Handel saw a little bit of that revival, and this may be somewhere where you want to go later on. It's not until Mendelssohn comes around that there's another revival for Messiah on the scene that sort of postures it for the future success that it has 100 years after Handel's long gone. So that's a long roundabout answer to say, nope, opera and oratorio. Aaron, would
those
you?
those little things.
I think, I think for the everyday household listening, or even, what's programmed the most often, it's for sure Messiah.
Mhm.
And you might get Israel and Egypt every now and then. But beyond that, for those of us in the choir world, you're still going to end up coming back to programming probably the coronation anthems. The Chandos anthems are awesome also, but you really get, I think, Handel's the beauty and the grace of Messiah on this really little tightly compact piece for these coronation anthems. And honestly, DJ, the one thing I would say, though, if you think about this, one of the things that you'll still hear on commercials fairly often is the beginning of Zadok, right?
Yep.
Because that's one of those Zadok. It's just visceral, honestly.
Yeah, it is.
And so I think you will hear that, and folks won't know what that is, but they'll say, "Oh yeah, I think I have heard that."
Yeah.
Isn't that a part of Messiah? No,
Right. Right.
that's kind of what you get with that. But I would say that if any of those other smaller works are more readily heard, it would be Zadok. And those coronation anthems are absolutely worth your time. If you don't have the full 3 hours to listen to Messiah, listen to a 14-minute coronation anthem or a 9-minute coronation anthem. And you'll still get a lot of the same drama, just in a very small package.
Wow.
Rhythmic, and the rhythmic drive and the harmonic drive that fuels the coronation anthems are the same thing that fills Messiah, just on a much
absolutely
smaller scale. And I thought about this after I'd already waxed on about all of those things. The instrumental genre of the concerto grosso,
right,
have been important in the keyboard world and in the string world, because they're Handel. I would argue that they became more popular after the fact of Messiah's popularity than they would have ever become on their own. But those are another important contribution to the overall oeuvre from Mr. Handel's pen.
So why do you think his works have stood the test of time? It's kind of a broad question, I know, but I think there were lots of composers over the centuries, and they had their various moments in the spotlight. But here we are, 21st century, and it's still a staple in many orchestras, in many concert halls across the world. What do you think about Handel that has actually made his music stand the test of time?
Well, I'll take an angle that may not be as obvious, but that's really superficial. Handel lived an incredibly long life for someone who lived when he lived. So he was able to compose over a long period of time, 1685, 1759. People just didn't live that long. I mean, what was Mozart when he died? 33?
30, yeah.
Really?
Very
Wow, that young.
Beethoven was early 50s, late 40s, even though he looks much older in every depiction.
Every bust you see, he looks like he's old,
But you see a picture of Handel, and here's this stately, older-looking statesman sitting at the harpsichord with his hair in, judicial permage. There's probably a better way to say that, but he covered a long period of time, and so that's an easy but oft overlooked answer, I think, to why they've hung around as long, is because of the sheer number of output that he had.
I guess he had longer to develop as well, his skills, because he lived longer.
I think one of the things, it's just the fact that Messiah is the thing that everybody knows by Handel. Sure, there are a ton of other things, we've covered that, but Messiah had such an impact. We were talking about this earlier, DJ and I, and I think even in this so far, is that the texts are biblical in nature. They come straight from the scripture, but there is no specific reference to the actual resurrection. So you don't have the actual resurrection plucked out, detailed from the gospel, right? And so there are opportunities for non-believers to find things in there that connect with them. And I think that the bigger thing that I was thinking about this afternoon or this morning with this is Messiah is so connected with Christmas, and culture around the globe celebrates Christmas, whether it is sacred or secular. It's still Christmas, and we're gonna have, our fruit cake and our whatever else. What is it? Is it mince pies over there? Is that what you got?
Yes, unfortunately.
Okay.
Wassail.
Wassail. You got to have that. And the thing about it is Messiah has become so wed to Christmas, the cultural expression. Now, does every household listen to it like it listens to Mariah Carey? No, they don't. But they do. Many, many homes cannot experience Christmas without listening to Messiah. Same thing in my home. We're going to listen to Messiah, the whole thing, all 3 hours, multiple times, And so for the fact that it is directly associated with a season that we celebrate every single year, I think there has to be some element of that cultural association with Christmas and that desire for that home feeling, that feeling of safety and security that comes with the holiday season. And Messiah is intrinsically a part of that for so many people.
It's a part of that warm blanket you return to every November and just wrap yourself in it. and it just brings you comfort. Something else you talked about how there is no resurrection mention. There's barely a gospel mention, but for the nativity section. And it's short. It's 3 angelic sentences and a chorus. That's it. And it's the short bit from Luke 1 and 2. But the reason that's important is that comparing Messiah to the St. Matthew Passion, the St. John Passion of Bach, you couldn't have 2 more different pieces. With Bach, it's Jesus in your face. There's no skirting around it. Whereas with Messiah, a non-believing performer, a non-believing listener can find it a little bit easier to ignore the underlying message in Messiah than you can in any of the Bach big works, the B minor, the Passions, the cantatas. I mean, they were circled around the Christian year. And so those are 2 divergent paths around why. I mean, he could have just as easily included, we were talking about this, it would have been so easy for Jennings to include something about Pentecost. I mean, it's just ripe for a Holy Spirit aria with a fiery bass to just let it rip a time or two. And he could have called it Christus, but he didn't. He called it Messiah because it's centered in the Old Testament prophecies. And that I think is a contributor to its lasting nature. I mean, Mendelssohn tried to write an oratorio called Christus, and it was a flop.
Exactly.
I mean, his oratorio about the life of Paul was more successful. Paulus. But I mean, Handel was wise. He knew his audience. He knew the commercial side. He knew, not commercial in the sense that we use commercial now. Commercial in the sense that music was part of the social life in the public square all the time in a much different way than it is now. Not commercialization, but he knowing what people craved, and for lack of a better way to put it, putting people in the seats. He knew what he needed to do to get people from every walk to engage with the work, and that goes right into the people on the stage singing it or playing it with him as well. He knew what he was doing in calling it Messiah.
Yeah.
Then and now, I think if we don't take this into the modern context, then I think we're missing something, because I think you're dead on the money, DJ. That's the lasting power. We still want to sing it. People still want to sing it. And honest, whenever I'm talking to my friends in the symphonic world, they're saying every year they put it on Facebook, oh, here we go for my 33rd Messiah every year. I know that Messiah pays the bills, but it's still great music.
Yeah.
It is still music that is rich with informing power and fulfilling power in the performance.
Yeah.
So,
and let's also, because this podcast does talk about hymns, not ignore the fact that Handel's hymn tunes, a la Joy to the World, Antioch, or the St. Thomas tune. I mean, there are tunes that they evoke imagery of Messiah. And just like I can't do Christmas without listening to at least 3 different versions of Messiah over the course of the season, I can't do Christmas without Joy to the World. And musically put Glory to God on one side and Joy to the World on the other, and see what doesn't line up.
It's very, very true. Before we wrap up, Cara, did you have any other questions for them? Comments?
No, I'm just basking in it all.
Yeah. We're like so simple, and you guys are just like showering us with so much information. That is so cool.
My flatmate does sing in a choir, and they sang Zadok at Christmas, just before Christmas, and she was saying she loves it, but the breathing is hard work in parts. She's like, I thought I was gonna pass out at one point.
Yeah.
Well, and especially if you find, some British conductor that when they get to the third movement, they want to just go like gangbusters. after the melismas in the first movement, the next thing you know, and all the people rejoice. Just gird your loins and get on your horse, because this thing's about to take off. But yeah, even you said this, Aaron, and you're exactly right. The first chord, when the choir, and even the even the opening figure, it is so iconic. It's every bit as iconic, whether people recognize it or not, as bum 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 bum.
You're so right.
It just endures. I mean, even to the fact that one of the ways that I wanted to say this is it connects with everybody. I love in my spare time to smoke meat, whether it's barbecue, pork, beef, whatever. So I watch a lot of YouTube channels. And one of the YouTube channels that I watch is called Meat Church.
Oh, yes.
And one of the main things they do, they play the Hallelujah chorus.
I know.
For the Meat Church, and
right down here in Cedar Hill, Texas.
That's right. That they've got meat on the spit, and you raise it up, and it's Hallelujah. And we're smoking meat here, but Handel is connecting with every Joe that watches that show.
Well, and not just that. In some sense, it's broken into pop culture because,
for sure.
I mean, okay, you're watching some game show and it's time for the bonus round, and our winner today with 14,000 points is Joe Schmo. Bum 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 bum. I mean, it's out there. It's it's everywhere. It has pervaded culture in that it's everywhere. It's everywhere.
Yeah, most definitely. And that's why we're going to be really excited to talk to you next week, more getting into the details of the song. But we're going to have you stick around just for a bonus question where we're actually going to talk about what's the best time of year really to sing this song. Maybe it'll be a debate. But until then, where can people find you guys online?
I'm on Instagram. You can check me out, see all my flowers, my smoked meats, and my choir life. You can find me there, Aaron Rice 10 on Insta.
I'm on Insta as Man with Baton, all one word, lowercase, and my same username for all things since Instant Messenger dropped in 1994.
Nice.
And you can find music at fearless4you.com or djbulls.com.
Great. Thank you guys so much for your time. We'll have all those links in the description. Go check them out. Really cool dudes. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you guys.